All right, well, it's great to be here. I was here at MUFON about a year and a half ago in this very theater, and I recognize a lot of you. It's good to see you. I want to tell you a few more things about myself. Just like you, I've always been interested in unexplained, paranormal, Bigfoot, giants, UFOs, Atlantis, ESP, and reincarnation, all that kind of stuff. And I grew up in Durango, Colorado, actually, and got a good dose of Johnny Quest cartoons as a kid. That got me going. And my parents liked to travel a lot. My father was a very outdoorsy hiker guy, and I wanted to go to the Himalayas and climb Mount Everest, and I wanted to go to monasteries in Tibet and stuff like that. And I was fortunate I was able to do a lot of those things. Lately, I have been on the show, Ancient Aliens. Let's see if I can get this going here. And it's actually, I think, only their 10th year season, but they have over 100 episodes now. On the DVDs, it's one season ahead. One year became 2 seasons or something. They just explained that to me. And they are making another season of Ancient Aliens. I just came back from Los Angeles last week doing some more episodes. So they're going to do another 15. History Channel is very popular, very glad with Ancient Aliens. And Ancient Aliens is a very popular show in foreign countries. And when I go to South America and Mexico, even India and Hungary and places like that, they watch Ancient Aliens, and they are popular shows. In the last few years, sometimes I go to the airport and people will recognize me, and they'll come up to me and they'll say, "What's with that guy's hair?" And Giorgio's a great guy, by the way. I've known him a long time. We're actually very good friends, and I've known him from before the Ancient Alien show, and Eric von Däniken too, who's also a pretty nice guy. I like Eric a lot. So look, what we're going to look at tonight is really from 2 of my books. This one, Yetis, Sasquatch, and Hairy Giants. Mainly a cryptozoological thing, but it has a lot of giants material in it. And I've spent a lot of time in the Himalayas, also on Yeti expeditions. We'll discuss that. And also some of the material from the presentation days from this book too, The Enigma of Cranial Deformation, where we'll also really look at some of these giants and Anunnaki and stuff like that. We will have an intermission after a little while, in about an hour, and we'll have an intermission, and then we'll go through a second part. So one of the first things I want to mention about giants and the whole idea of people who are 8, 10, maybe even 12 feet tall, humans. We've got the CONEHEADS too, with elongated heads and things like that. And it's a popular legends and fables all through history. And part of really the early thing I want to talk about is that 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, everything was bigger. We had saber-tooth tigers, aurochs. This is a painting of an auroch from the Lascaux caves in France, and it's thought to be about 20,000 years old. Aurochs are the ancestors of modern cattle, but they were huge, and they stood at the shoulder about 7 feet tall. So that was aurochs, okay, the early cattle. We had mammoths, giant sloths, giant elk, the dire wolves. Plants were bigger too. Insects were bigger. Everything was bigger 12,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, and people were bigger too. So really throughout history, except for the last, say, 100 years, where through better nutrition and whatnot, people have been getting taller. And say the Chinese are a very good example. The Chinese people are becoming a taller race now, mainly through better nutrition. But really, throughout history, people have been getting shorter. And that is because human beings apparently were much taller in ancient times, and that people were more naturally, apparently 7, 8 feet tall, and then we've gotten shorter. So in fact, like these giant sloths, which in South America, they supposedly became extinct around 10,000 years ago, but they found a cave in Chile where it seemed that somebody had kept a giant sloth in captivity. And this cave they dated to 2,000-3,000 BC. So this was in Chile. All these stories of knights and giants, a lot of it is simply myth and fable, but a lot of it is real. The story of David and Goliath. Goliath was supposedly this 9-foot-tall Philistine. And that is what people did in ancient times. It's like a football game. Warfare is mankind's favorite sport. And like a football team or a rugby team, when you're going to go out and fight the fight or have your game, you put the big guys up front. And that's what the Philistines did with Goliath. He was their biggest, tallest guy, literally a giant. And he was their champion. And that's what you did in ancient warfare. You put the big guys up front, and warfare basically took the average height of people down several inches because the tall guys were all getting killed in the battles, all right? And in fact, during the Napoleonic Wars in the 1800s, those wars brought the average height of the French people down several inches, so that the French are not really known as being a very tall race today, and it's because all the tall guys in France basically got killed. Early on, as explorers went around South America, this is in Tierra del Fuego, they got down there, they found that the people there were extremely tall. They called them giants. At that time, Europeans were really only, say, 5'5" or 6", although many were still very tall, 6 feet. George Washington, by the way, was also very tall. George Washington was, he was like 6'3" or something like that. And that's something with American presidents is that political people have noticed, is that the people who get elected to be president in the United States tend to be very tall people. And Obama's tall, Trump is tall, all the Bushes tall, Reagan was tall, Lincoln, of course, tall. So anyway, so this is the idea that people are getting shorter throughout history, and there are these, but they would find giant skeletons. Something else that made people think about giants is the giant stones, like this one at Baalbek in Lebanon. And there are stories too in the Bible of the Nephilim and the Anakim, and when Moses and the Israelites first arrived in the area of Jordan and were looking out into what they call the Promised Land, they sent spies out in the Bible, and they came back and they said, man, these guys, we're like grasshoppers to them. They are giants. You know, we're just these little humans. And so this is a story right out of the Old Testament where somehow the Holy Land was occupied by some giant race of people. Although it doesn't quite hold up that they're 20 feet tall or even 15 feet tall, but probably people were 8, 9 feet tall then, easily. But one of the things was, and this is the unfinished obelisk in Aswan, what was happening too was coming into certain areas of the Middle East, like Baalbek, also Jerusalem had these giant, massive blocks as well, what you saw in Egypt. And the Spanish had the same thing. When they got to Cuzco, they saw the giant megalithic walls, huge stones that weigh, in some cases, hundreds of tons. Obelisks weigh like 500 tons. And the Spanish and other early people, when they would see these giant ruins, they would think, wow, only giants could have moved these rocks, because we can't do it. We can't move these giant blocks. And ultimately, as I try and explain in my books, although it's hard to explain, in order to move many of these huge blocks of stones, including obelisks, and Egyptologists have never really explained what obelisks are about and why Egyptians or Ethiopians or others would quarry what's called a monolithic block of stone, of granite, lift it out of the quarry, move it 100 miles maybe, and then stand it up at the Luxor Temple or something like that. So even today, archaeologists can't explain all that, but the early people tended to ascribe all of these things to giants. So only giants could build this kind of thing. Although, we all know that if you've got your anti-gravity rays and devices, you don't have to be a giant to levitate huge stones and stuff like that and put them into place. So part of the whole thing too in European and was what they call the wild man stories of giants, but really giantism, just for starters, is something that's inherently in our genetics. So we have people like this, Big Gust, who was 7 feet 6 inches tall and worked for the railway in Pennsylvania or something like that. When you're a normal sized person and you're say 6 feet tall or a little bit under 6 feet, I myself, I'm like 5'10" or 5'11". And when you're standing there and looking at somebody who is 7, 8 feet tall, they are really head and shoulders above you. I mean, a tall person really is a giant to you. So when you put things like headdresses and turbans on and crowns, and platform shoes or something like that, suddenly, yeah, you're not just 7.5 feet tall, you're 8.5 feet tall with a big crown on your head and all kinds of stuff like that. They would have guys from Mongolia and Tibet, by the way. This guy's a Mongol up here on the right. And some of these guys are extremely tall. And then you have the giants. One of the things with being a giant is that you have to be perfectly proportioned too. And one of the early giants, like this is actually at the Hunterian Museum in London. And this was an Irish giant named Byrne. He was well proportioned. And so he was nearly 9 feet tall or so, and a well proportioned people. The tallest man ever known was a guy named Wadlow in Illinois, but he had skeletal problems, and he had a pituitary gland problem. So he was not a really, even though he was extremely tall, he wasn't a well-proportioned or athletic kind of person, shall we say. So we're going to look at some of the strange skeletons and skulls. Some of these are at the Hunterian Museum, which is in London, and it's a kind of a special surgeon's museum. At that museum are a lot of unusual skeletons and craniums. And the kind of things I look for, which as we'll get into that, is these cone heads. And some of these guys with the extended craniums, they too were extremely tall, and they had the elongated skulls. Okay, this is an elongated skull from Egypt, and it's at the Hunterian Museum. So now you're having, say you're already a tall person, a giant, but now you're going to have this extended cranium. All right, we're going to go then now to this area of Peru, which is called the Ica area, and this area Paracas. Lima is up north, up here, the capital of Peru. This is a desert area to the south along the coast. Nazca is right down here with the famous lines and stuff like that in the desert. And it's really here at Paracas and Ica where it's so incredibly dry there. It's really the driest desert in the world. It's what they call the Atacama Desert. And areas of northern Chile up there, it's never recorded to have rained. And so skeletal material and burials and craniums and stuff like that are buried there can last for thousands of years without deteriorating. And this is from a pyramid called the Chongos Pyramid. So this guy has a long extended cranium. His head is maybe twice the size of ours, and it's extended out. So just by doing this extended cranium on people, and we don't know, and this is one of the mysteries, whether people actually are born this way, and this is a natural condition. And that is the big question. And we talk about this in the book, The Enigma of Cranial Deformation. These skulls are completely real, and they're found all over the world. And I believe, honestly, that there's something of a cover-up going on with these craniums, because many museums won't put them on display. Even though they have them, such as in Malta as an example. They've got them at the museum and we know they have them, but they don't put them out for people to see. It's just too weird in a sense. And people often might think they were extraterrestrials, and good reason for that. This is the Chongos Pyramid, which is in near Paracas. So this is where a lot of these unusual, elongated skulls and craniums have come out of. I mean, these guys look pretty weird, and some of them still have hair on them. The idea that it's a man-made kind of thing, it's pressure on the baby's skull when you're still a child, just an infant, you have plates in your head, and those plates haven't fused yet. And in fact, that's so that a baby's head can get bigger as he grows. And eventually, as you become about like a teenager or something, the plates in your head will fuse. And if you do all this properly, you're a conehead in the end. The big question, really, when it comes to these people who are coneheads, is are they imitating somebody and developing children and creating these coneheads? And we know that they did that in many cases. There's no real question about that. We'll see that in a little bit. You can see these oddball craniums. But the big question is are some people naturally actually like this with these elongated heads? And they're giants too, by the way, these guys. So here we go. X-rays of them. This is totally real thing. And it was funny, one day I was watching CNN a couple of years ago, and suddenly Jake Tapper started mentioning oddball TV shows, and he mentioned Ancient Aliens, and he put a couple of these coneheads up. And it was my photos, actually. And he was sort of making fun of it, and I sort of jumped up and I was like, hey, I'm on CNN. And but yeah, he was almost sort of like, well, is this fake or something? No, it's absolutely not fake. So this is what people would have looked like with these elongated heads. They're probably going to be very tall people. They're almost, when you have this elongated cone head, you can add another 6 to 8 inches of height to a person. And then put a crown and feathered headdress and other stuff on him. Suddenly the guy's 7, 8, 9 feet tall with this elongated weird head. And you get into these stories of what they call the watchers and things like that. Well, now my friend in Peru, Brian Forster, who's Canadian, he's married to a Peruvian gal now. He was able to acquire this unusual skull in Paracas. And it is really kind of a unique skull. So we'll look at the very top of it. Okay, that's the top, and this is what it looks like from the side. He's a cone head, very well preserved skull, but this is something very unusual about this skull. It doesn't have all of the seams and what we would call the plates of the head coming together, and that's unusual. You would think that right up in here, we see one seam or suture of his skull coming together, but it's not up here. In fact, there was some little hole in his head. But yeah, he should have seams and stuff there. So the fact that this person is missing that is not easily explained. And that would indicate that this person his cranium has not really been manipulated, but this is how he actually looks. This perhaps is the skull of an extraterrestrial. I mean, of all of the skulls and skeletons and things like that I've ever seen, this single one is the one it's not easily explained. And so it's odd. So perhaps this guy actually genetically has this elongated skull. This is at Tiwanaku in Bolivia, and in fact, you see here lots of, plenty of these guys are cone heads. up here and that. And so these are the builders of Pumapunku and Tiwanaku and stuff like that. They've removed this from display now. So you can't see this. And in fact, when it was on display, which is the museum at Tiwanaku, you weren't supposed to take photos there either. But I'll be honest with you, when I get into these museums, I try and take photos whenever I can. And sometimes, the guard comes running up to you and you just say, oh, he says, no photography. And you go, okay. And then you put your camera back in your pocket and, and everything's cool. So anyway, yeah, so what I've found is that when it comes to a lot of these weird skulls and skeletal materials and things like that, and we'll talk about some stuff in Nevada, museums are nowadays, and maybe it's because of the Ancient Aliens TV show, but these museums are a little bit afraid to put some of this stuff out because people are going to come in and go, oh yeah, hey, it's the aliens or something. And museums tend to not like that kind of thing. So this is another interesting skull. This is also from Tiwanaku, and he's a conehead. And he's been trepanned. This is a double trepan. This is also very unusual. See, his head was cored into here, and that's what trepanning is. Trepanning is cutting a hole in your head. So next time someone tells you, I need that, like a hole in the head, this is what they're talking about. And what's interesting with this one, this is a pretty unique skull, is that he was trepanned twice. Okay, that's why there's an outer ring here which grew back. I mean, after a while, your head will grow back. And then he got trepanned a second time. And why the ancient people would do trepanning, we don't know. That's another mystery of what trepanning is all about. These are also just some ceramics on display at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. And I put this in here just to show you all the different kind of races that they've got there. This guy looks very oriental. This guy up here looks more sort of European. He's got a thick mustache and a beard. So he's looking more like a Phoenician or Mediterranean guy. American Indians, by the way, don't have facial hair. They don't grow beards and mustaches and stuff. This is also a trepan skull. And this guy has been trepanned up here with a saw. And then he had a gold plate put in his head. And he survived all this. And his skull then grew out over the gold plate. Why this went on, perhaps it was some kind of surgery. I mean, it's literally some sort of brain surgery. And archaeologists speculate that perhaps people who heard voices or having, psychological problems, maybe in those cases they would, not knowing what was going on, they would trepan them, let these bad spirits out of their head. I mean, this is just kind of mundane archaeological ideas. This guy here, this is another skull in Peru, and he's literally got a set of amethyst teeth here that were put in. Whether that was done while he was alive or when he was dead, we don't know. But so you have these unusual trepanned skulls and stuff like that. Here's another one. You can actually buy these online. You can buy replicas of these elongated skulls. There are a couple of hundred. There's a couple of sites where you can buy them. And down in Peru, I love going to South America, and both Peru and Bolivia are just land of adventure. And lots of talk about ovnis and extraterrestrials there, and all the elongated skulls. ET comes in a UFO. That's what the headline is saying from this Peruvian newspaper. OVNI is what is UFO really in Spanish. Llego means to come, to arrive. So, and that was all about this skull that they had found near to Machu Picchu. So he's a conehead, and the newspapers immediately, yeah, he's an extraterrestrial. He must have come here in a UFO, right? So I can tell you in South America is a hotbed of UFO activity. There's so much UFO stuff going on there. There's a lot of UFO activity around Lake Titicaca. Most South Americans do believe in UFOs because it's a popular and it's a common subject down there. Here's Giorgio and I in Paracas. This was part of his TV show called In Search of Aliens. It went for a year and went down to Peru with that. That was a fun show. So these are some of the CONEHEADS that are there in the museum in Paracas. So we'll move now out of South America down to Mexico and the Olmecs. The Olmecs are also have elongated heads and skulls. They also apparently were giants. Here's an Olmec skull from Mexico City in the museum. They did use cranial deformation just like in South America. This guy here is from the museum in Merida in the Yucatan. He's been trepanned. He's different from a conehead. He's what we call a pumpkin head. His face has been kind of smashed in instead of elongated. So yeah, he has this elongated, and apparently with some of the Olmecs, they would even put a cleft in the skull, and discuss a lot of that in my book, The Enigma of Cranial Deformation. And this is the Mayans also did this cranial deformation and conehead type stuff. This is a mural from Bonampak, which is near Palenque. It's a jungle river town near Palenque. But yeah, so this is what the Mayans looked like themselves when they weren't wearing their big headdresses and feathered headdresses. They also, almost all the Mayans were coneheads. And for sure, here's another Mayan skull that's also a conehead skull here. So a lot of what the Mayans came, their culture came ultimately from the Olmecs, which are pretty mysterious. These two elongated skull people are Akhenaten and Nefertiti's daughters, Meritaten and Meketaten, and they were coneheads too. And that's a mural from Akhenaten. This is one of these, it's a statue of one of the girls, probably Meketaten. And this is how her head looked. They have these elongated heads, but they sort of went back. Rather than being a cone head going straight up, it was kind of back behind their heads. And Tutankhamun looked like that too. This is actually a statue of Tutankhamun. And so this is a statue from his own tomb. So he has long ears, he has this elongated head. He's a cone head. So you often hear all this stuff about Tutankhamun and his tomb and his mask, but you never hear that he's got this elongated head. But that is the case. All right, now let's go to the Anunnaki and the Sumerians. Here we go. Your Anunnaki guys are in a winged disc up here. They've got their headdresses and stuff. They're wearing all their strange gear and whatnot. Here's an Anunnaki guy. He's got wings, carrying this satchel. He's holding this pine cone. He's got the full beard and stuff like that. Elongated headdress. He's probably a cone head. And that's part of the thing, is that when you're wearing these big headdresses and crowns and things like that, people can't really see your skull that much. They're just seeing your face ultimately. But Sumerian and Assyrian seals show all kinds of strange people, including constantly people in the sky on these winged discs and things like that. They're the gods, they're the Anunnaki, they're the watchers also of the Bible, and they were some kind of coneheads. And so we look at these guys, and we'll go to the next slide here where we can see them. This is actually a woman. These are what they call Ubaid figures. And these people are giants too. They must have been 7, 8 feet tall ultimately. They have what's called the coffee bean eyes. And this is what archaeologists call these eyes. They do have these unusual eyes. These are statuettes, okay, from a Sumerian town called Ubaid, which is in northern Iraq. And And these are real. So you have these guys, they have the long heads, they have the coffee bean eyes, which are strange, almost like insectoid eyes. Sometimes they have weird faces. I mean, these guys look pretty strange. And this is actually a woman here suckling a child, and she's got also kind of slits for eyes, and she is some kind of a conehead. So these are the Anunnaki people. We have found now Sumerian bowl. There's a Sumerian bowl now and other writing. They found at Tiwanaku. We know that now the Sumerians around 3000 BC were in Peru and Bolivia. So the big question is with these guys is, yeah, are they extraterrestrials? That Zachariah and Sitchin wrote, 7 books or something, and it's all about these characters here. And, according to him, they're coming from the 12th planet and stuff like that. Mainstream archaeologists don't have a real good explanation for this. They would call it just stylized statuary. And there is an element of that where you stylize things, you give people different weird eyes. But the one thing that was probably real, at least, is they're coneheads. That for sure. No matter what kind of eyes they have or whatever, they have this elongated cranium, and they are 7, 8 feet tall, stuff like that. Now you have these Chinese guys and these immortals from China, and they were doing this too. And so here you have these pumpkin head type guys, and this is associated a lot with the Olmecs, whose heads have this cleft in the head. And again, archaeologists can't explain that. Whether this was, again, some natural thing, which they don't think, or whether this is some artificial manipulation. And the Chinese were well known for that, and they did, as most of you probably know, what's called foot binding. And the Chinese, and they only stopped this around 1910 or so, where women were thought, women with small, actually deformed feet were very sexy. So they did foot binding as little girls, and they tied their feet up. And a lot of the concubines for the Chinese emperor and stuff, I mean, they couldn't even really walk. They had to be carried because their feet were bound and kind of doubled over in small feet. People are still doing this head binding even today in a few areas. In Vanuatu, this is in Vanuatu, which is an island in the Pacific. It's off New Caledonia, and it's a Melanesian island. So this baby here, his head is bound. He's going to be a conehead. This is a photo taken in the 1960s even. And in fact, some of the Kurds up in northern Iraq, they were doing this too. She's from Vanuatu. It's a little bit hard, but yeah, she's a conehead. And this is modern day. This is a tribe in Africa, in the northern Congo, called the Mangbitu. She's a conehead. This little baby, yeah, he's going to be a conehead. His head is all wrapped up and bound to force his cranium into this elongated thing. On Vanuatu, when they asked people, why are you doing this? Why bind your kids and turn them into these coneheads? And their explanation was that, the great people who came before us, they looked like this. And so, we want to look like them. And so we want to have coneheads just like, the royalty or whatever who used to come to our island. So here we go. Yeah, these little kids, you get your head, and then in the end, yeah, your head is bound and forced up. So it's a strange thing that people did. We know that they did this artificial form. We still don't know why. They're imitating some kind of Egyptian royalty, Peruvian royalty, Sumerian royalty, who also had cone heads that perhaps were artificial, or did they naturally have these elongated heads? That's really the big question. All right, let's go actually to California. Early maps of California showed that California was actually sometimes it was a separate island. Sometimes there was a big sea that went into, they called the Mare West. Here's Cuvera. Here we are, and we're right here of Arizona. But they had this big sea coming up into what would be like Kingman and areas like that. And early Spanish maps of California showed big lakes in the Central Valley, where Fresno and stuff today is. And in fact, there was a type of a whale there. And the Golden Gate, as you came in today, the Golden Gate just goes into the small bay there in San Francisco. But not so long ago, maybe only 500 years ago, it emptied into this big inland sea in Central California, which was where Fresno is today. And there's still the remains of a lake there today called Tulare Lake. So geologists say that, yeah, there were all these lakes going up into Death Valley, what they called Lake Mannix. Death Valley was a lake. They called it Lake Manly. The Owens River, other lakes went up into Nevada. They were these kind of finger lakes that came up. And today it's all just the desert out there in California. Now here on the Nevada side, here's Lake Tahoe. See, all of these lakes were in Nevada, and they called it Lake Lahontan. And the Black Rock Desert is up here. We're going to go to the Lovelock Caves in a minute and to this area. Here's Winnemucca, Humboldt. I mean, the Humboldt Sink. The only thing that's left of this huge ancient lake today is Pyramid Lake that's north of Reno, and then Lake Tahoe, which is south of Reno. And the rest of it is now dried lakes. And this is what they call now the Great Basin. Here we're down here in Phoenix. The Great Basin comes up, and it goes all the way into Utah and Salt Lake City. And in fact, the Great Salt Lake is also remnants of this huge system of lakes. And then here's Reno and the lakes here. It would be Lake Tahoe, and then a Pyramid Lake here, and then we're going to go to Lovelock in a minute. But this whole central area here too was also apparently a big lake going even just say 500-600 years ago. When you go to Lovelock, Nevada, and there was a episode of Ancient Aliens on like season 3 or something, where I went with the crew to Lovelock, Nevada. There's a museum in Lovelock, Nevada that's fairly new. It wasn't there in the 90s. And they show you that there are mastodons from around there, and when it was a lake. And so the whole area is going back to 10,000, 12,000 BC. But then they've got this cabinet, and it's not on display. And you would think that the museum would want to have this on display. And in this cabinet are these giant skulls. And so they brought me there, and the crew had this jaw they got it from a dentist in Los Angeles. And it's just it's a plaster, casting of a normal person's lower jaw. So here we go. Here's the skeletons at Lovelock, Nevada. So here is a normal person's jaw from a dentist in LA. This is the jaw of these giants that were found in Lovelock. And here's a full skeleton. So you can see, I mean, these guys were big. They were like twice the size of a normal person. The story of the Lovelock Caves is a very strange story. And here I am. There were duck decoys. Here we go. It starts with her. Her name is Sarah Winnemucca, and she was the first Native American woman actually to write a book. And she wrote a book in the late 1800s called The Life of the Paiutes. She was a Paiute Indian princess there in the area of northern Nevada, Winnemucca and Lovelock. In fact, Winnemucca is named after her and her family. And that's a major city in this part of Nevada. So in her book, Life Among the Paiutes, she tells this strange story, how these giants, these cannibals, came to the Lovelock Caves and were attacking them, the Paiutes. And these giants were 8 feet tall or something. They had long red hair. And the story of the Paiutes is that they got tired of these giants attacking them. So they started attacking them back, and they drove them into a cave, which is today the Lovelock Cave. Here I am examining the things for the thing. What they found in the cave. Now, what happened was in 1910, so she tells a story of these giants and the cave, and this is their own legend. Then, like 20 years later, ranchers in Lovelock started digging out this cave. And it's a state monument today. And it's a kind of a secret cave. It's in these cliffs. You wouldn't really see it until you got right up to it. But what the ranchers were doing was digging bat guano out of it. And there was literally 10, 12 feet of bat guano built up in this cave over hundreds, thousands of years. And they were using it for fertilizer and their ranches and stuff like that. But as they started digging into the bat guano, they started finding duck decoys like this. And then they found giant skeletons. And these skeletons, as the story goes, starting in 1910, they would bring these skeletons out. They had long red hair, and they were 7 or 8 feet tall, these guys. And when I was in the 90s, when I was at the museum in Winnemucca, they have these duck decoys and things like that, and also giant sandals for huge, huge feet. And they described to me how they had all seen a photo of a rancher standing on a crate holding this skeleton up as high as he could to show that it was 8 feet long. And it was a photo they had all seen and remembered. But that photo was missing. And all the skeletons are missing. And in fact, the University of California at Berkeley came out in like 1915, and they finished the excavations in the cave. And we know for a fact that these giant red-haired skeletons came out of that cave. No one knows where they are. Even photos are missing. So is this like some kind of a cover-up? I mean, where the museum, literally, a museum has, or the university has these artifacts, and they won't put them on display. They won't even admit they have them. And even to the point where they remove photos. So that's part of the deal. When you go to Lovelock, there's a little display, and they make these guys, they don't make them out to be giants or anything. They're just some primitive tribe who's fishing along this, dry lake now. And they're primitive. So here's Sarah at Winnemucca again. So look, we know what came out of Lovelock. There's no question. And in fact, there's 2 museums in Nevada that are dedicated to the finds at Lovelock Cave. And in both museums, they said, boy, we would love to have those photos. We'd love to have those skeletons back. We don't know where they are. No one will tell us. And even, bizarrely, here, their own skeleton, they do have skulls and jaws of these guys, but they won't put them on display either. They only opened this up for the TV show. And I suppose if you went there, and you can see the duck decoys at the museum, but they won't show you the other stuff. We'll take a break here, just a minute. This was also nearby. This was apparently found in Yosemite. And this is also a mummy of a woman and a child. And she's clearly very tall. She's probably about 7 feet tall. This is pretty much like what they apparently found at the Lovelock Caves. Other giant things like this. This is from San Diego, where, this guy's like 10 feet tall. And so this may also, we don't know if this is a real one. The one before, we know this was real. This one, people have said was a hoax, possibly. We don't know. Some of these giant things from the early 70s or 1800s, were hoaxes. They found other skeletons like that in Ohio and whatnot, and so those things have disappeared too. And the idea then is that they go to the Smithsonian or they go to some university where they're locked away and people aren't going to see them. This was something too, a story of giants from an Aztec codex where they got tired of some giant and they went out and got him. And now, just to shift gears a little bit from giants and whatnot, let's go to talk about the San Pedro Mountain mummy. So back in the 1930s, what happened was some prospectors in what they call the Pedro Mountains of Wyoming, and they blasted out a mountain, and they were miners and stuff, and this cliff, and it uncovered a cave, a hollow in this cliff, and this little guy was sitting inside it. And he is only about 1.5 feet tall. He's like some kind of little hobbit or something. His legs were crossed and his arms are crossed. It was taken to the university or the Natural History Museum and the Field Museum in Chicago, where it was x-rayed. I mean, this thing was completely real. They wanted to find out whether it was human or not. And I've been told, actually, that he is sitting in a kind of a yoga posture, of all things, and a special yoga posture that he's in. Now, what's interesting with this is that, yeah, he disappeared. And in 1950, this guy, Bob David, he bought it, and then it vanished. No one knows where it is today. It's not in a museum. No one knows where it is. He disappeared. We only have photos and things of it. Where this San Pedro mummy, the Pedro mummy is, we don't know. And there's a reward offered out for it. So if you know where this thing is, if it's in your grandmother's basement, collect the reward. So here we are, the best picture. Something that's a little bit like him is what they call the salt man in Iran. And they found this guy in a salt mine, and he was some guy who had also been like shrunken down or something, and he was this little man, almost like a shrunken head. There are hoaxes on the internet, and now with Photoshop and stuff, you'll see pictures like this where guys in Saudi Arabia or something are excavating some giant super skeleton. They actually, in certain university classes, the instructors will, instruct their students to create hoax photos and stuff, see what they can do, and they've published them, and some of them are really good. This was a hoax too. This was called the Piltdown Man. This was late 1800s in England and Ireland, and a guy claimed that he had dug up this fossilized human person who was 12 feet tall or something like that. You've got other skulls too, like the horned people. I don't know if this is real or not, exactly where this comes from or who it is, this kind of thing. But there are these abnormal skulls and things like that. So let's take a break right now, and then when we come back, we'll talk about Yetis and Bigfoot and giants.
Our attention back to David Hatcher Childress.
Just during the break, a couple of people have come up to me and told me a couple of interesting things. One was that somebody was asking me also about Death Valley and the stories that in Death Valley there were caves and also mummies and giants were reported there, and that is right. And I write about that in my book, Lost Cities of Ancient Mysteries of the Southwest. If those of you who have been to Death Valley, there's a place there that's well worth visiting called Scotty's Castle. And in fact, I believe that it's that castle, or it's another thing that's nearby it that was on the cover of the Eagles album, Hotel California. And in fact, they sued him for that, for using a picture of their villa or something. But yeah, Scotty at Scotty's Castle became very wealthy, and he built literally a castle in Death Valley. And he claimed, too, that he knew of a secret place in Death Valley that was a cave system that had all these mummies in it, and they were giants. And there was all this gold artifacts and stuff, too. And that whenever he needed money, he would go out into Death Valley, go into these secret caves, and he would get gold artifacts and things like that. And there's a 1934 book that I have called Death Valley Men, and it's just a mainstream book about Death Valley, but the last 2 chapters in that book are all about this. And I quote it in my book on Lost Cities of Ancient Mysteries of the Southwest. So yeah, this whole strange story of Death Valley Scotty, a cavern system, a treasure, and these mummies, giants, mummified giants, similar to what's in Lovelock. Someone also mentioned to me that David Wilcock was on the Coast to Coast last night and talking about, I guess, Anunnaki, and I didn't hear it myself. And that, yeah, there had been a pole shift, and that Antarctica suddenly ended up at the South Pole kind of thing, and that the American base there is digging into the ice, and they're founding these giants under the ice, apparently. And then that strange story that was a couple of weeks ago of Buzz Aldrin, the astronaut who went to the moon and all that, yeah, he had flown to Antarctica on a tour flight, actually, but then he had to be medevaced out because he had a heart attack while he was there, literally at the South Pole. And I guess in the Coast to Coast thing last night, David Wilcock, who you know, he has all these secret sources who have their secret sources, and that the story was that what had given Buzz Aldrin the heart attack was that he was taken down under the ice and shown a 14-foot body of an alien, you know, with a cone head. And Buzz Aldrin wasn't ready for that, and so he had a heart attack, and they flew him out. I don't know if that story is true. I don't think David Wilcock knows whether it's true or not. Buzz Aldrin did go to the South Pole and have a heart attack. What is at the South Pole? And this just gives me a chance to talk to you guys about this because I don't normally talk about it, and I'll get back into this in a minute. But a lot of people don't realize what's at the South Pole. And because I'm also the editor, I have a publishing company, Adventures Unlimited Outside, and we publish all kinds of books, and we reprint books. And one of the books we reprinted was The Hollow Earth, which is about Hollow Earth stuff. And so that's another whole weird story. Hollow Earth believers believe there's holes at the poles. If you go to the South Pole, there's a what they call a Sims hole. You can go into the Hollow Earth or something like that. But here's what's interesting, and talk about the Buzz Aldrin, because that was an interesting story. What Americans are unaware of is that despite the fact, and this is what's going on in the news now, despite the fact that, you know, we had the Cold War with the Russians, and supposedly during World War II, the Russians were our allies. We armed them. We gave them technology. Many people believe that the Americans, and in fact that's the Alger Hiss case and other things, that the American government gave the Russians the atom bomb. I mean, they couldn't have really done it themselves, so we gave it to them. And the Germans had already developed the atom bomb too. During the Cold War, when America and Russia are supposedly adversaries, we have had 2 joint military bases with the Russians and still have them today. One is in space. It's called Skylab. Okay, that is a joint American-Russian military project. It's a base, especially in space. Okay? And in fact, today, we can't go to Skylab or into space, supposedly, unless a Russian rocket launches us into space. I mean, we have to use Russian spacecraft to go into space right now. But they're supposedly our enemy? At the same time that we had, and this is starting in the 60s, that we had well, the Skylab didn't start until the 70s, We've had a joint military base with the Russians at the South Pole for decades. And that is a secret. Most people do not know about that. It's a quasi-secret. So what is at the South Pole? Because I'm dealing a lot of times with people who believe in the hollow earth, and I don't think there are holes at the poles, honestly, but the hollow earth theory is an interesting one. But what I'm often have to tell people, I say, well, what's at the South Pole is a military base, and a lot of people don't know that. At the South Pole, right now, is an American military base that's also with the Russians. And it goes 9 stories or 12 stories underground in the ice. And it's a manned base. And in fact, I first learned about this base from a British TV show called Pole to Pole. And probably many of you will remember the popular British comedy team called Monty Python's Flying Circus. Yes, I'm actually working that into my lecture, Monty Python's Flying Circus. After Monty Python's Flying Circus, then the comedians separated, and one of them's name is Michael Palin. And Michael Palin liked to travel. So Michael Palin of Monty Python's Flying Circus, he did a show for TV4 in Britain, and it was a show called Pole to Pole. And it was like 12 episodes of this TV show, like an hour show for British TV, and it was shown on the PBS in the United States. In that TV show, he starts at the North Pole, flies up to the North Pole, and then each episode he's actually flying to the South Pole. And in the last episode of his TV show, he leaves from Tierra del Fuego to fly to the South Pole in a chartered plane, just like Buzz Aldrin did a few weeks ago. But in Michael Palin's Pole to Pole show, he's flying to the South Pole, and they're going to land on ice and everything, and they're radioing the base. It's a military base at the South Pole. Okay, well, I'm Michael Palin. I'm coming here with my camera crew. Get ready. And they tell him, no, don't come here. Go back. Don't land at the South Pole. No, go, turn around. And he's, no, I got a TV show to make. Oh, we'll be there in 2 hours, In the show, they land at the South Pole. And they get out of the plane, and their cameras are rolling. They take them into the first level of the base. And it is a cafeteria where Russians and Americans are, getting their soup and sandwich in this under ice cafeteria. And the base goes for another 11 stories underneath the ice. So here's part of the thing. And it's interesting what's happening today, where suddenly Russia really our enemy with all the problems in the world. And I kind of like Trump for this because, this idea that the Russians are really our enemy, that doesn't hold true. And here's the other thing to think about. Right after World War II, Einstein personally wrote a letter to President Truman and suggested in his letter, and this is famous, he suggested in his letter that America and the Soviet Union work together and control the world. That's what Einstein told Truman. Well, what happened instead was the Cold War and a superpower arms race, and supposedly we're at war with the Russians. Then we had a space race too. Well, here's the thing. You cannot have a superpower arms race by yourself. You need someone to have an arms race with. And in 1949, Americans weren't going to have an arms race with Mexico. And we'd already destroyed Nazi Germany, although maybe they had moved to Antarctica or something in South America by then. But yeah, in my own opinion, the arms race and the Cold War with the Russians was real, but at the same time, it was kind of a hoax. We didn't need to really do that. And in both countries, we spent Billions, trillions of dollars, building up arms. And the Russians really paid a big price for that, because instead of building a car and a tractor for everybody in Russia, they built a tank and a cannon. Well, in America, fortunately, we actually built cars and tractors for people, and we built weapons too, because we're so wealthy. But that's what's at the South Pole. So that is bizarre, and it's kind of a secret. By the way, Edmund Hillary's son, Edmund Hillary was the first guy who climbed Mount Everest, and we'll get into Yetis and stuff here in a minute with him, so we can work all this back in. His son, Peter Hillary, is also very well known, and I lived in New Zealand for a while. Peter Hillary and an Australian friend, this is in the late 90s, they cross-country skied to the South Pole, which took them 2 months. And in New Zealand and in Australia, it was big news. I mean, this was front page news almost every day. And when they reached the South Pole, it was big news. And they got to the South Pole, and that base is there. But they wouldn't let them into the base. And they had to sleep in their tents outside when this warm military base with a hot kitchen was right there. And the New Zealand papers and stuff, they mentioned this and talked about it. And that's the only time you'll ever hear that. So anyway, one last thing. So back to David Wilcock on Coast to Coast last night. Buzz Aldrin, when I saw that Buzz Aldrin had landed at the South Pole, I was like, well, yeah, that's a 12-story under-ice military, it's an underground base there, right there. But here's the problem with David Wilcock's story. The ice cap, it's a mile thick. So yeah, I mean, there's a 12-story base right there at the South Pole, but the ice is a mile thick, and it's still growing. So I doubt that, in my mind, the real conspiracy here is what's going on at the South Pole, and why do the Americans and Russians feel they have to have a base at the South Pole? What's that about? Like, why would we even have a military base there? And that's a big question too, of what's going on at the South Pole. And you have the Nazi stuff, are extraterrestrials or spaceships coming and going out at the South Pole? Oh, we don't know. All right, let's go. Speaking of South Pole and very cold, let's go to the Himalayas. Yetis. Yetis are well known in Tibet and Nepal. Here's a tin kind of thing. Yetis are coneheads too, by the way. Just interestingly, we'll see some Yeti scalps in a minute. They like to party. And actually, that's one of the stories of Yetis and Bigfoot and these guys are like half human. They're sort of half humans, half missing link kind of thing. Bigfoots and Yetis and concave same. But they're attracted to human women, and they're dangerous. Men they will kill, but women they're not going to rip women apart usually. And in fact, there's a number of cases of Yetis wanting to have sex with women. And there's a case in Nepal, and I write about it in my book, where so here's the Mount Everest region, and the Aran Valley, this is Kanchenjunga, here's Bhutan over here, Tibet. All along the Himalayas, which is this border here, is Yeti country. Particularly this area of Nepal. This is the Aran Valley here. The Aran Valley is a very deep tropical valley and a river that cuts through the Himalayas. So on one hand, you have icy mountains that are 25,000 feet high and high passes. But down in this valley, you've got jungle and monkeys and pandas and stuff like that. So you have these two ecosystems. One where you have the ice and snow together, also with valleys with lots of plant life and animal life and stuff like that. The big thing with Yetis, the stories with Yetis go back for many, many centuries, but this was the big one when his name was Eric Shipton, and it was early reconnoitering of Mount Everest by the British. And they came over this pass, and here was these footprints in the snow. And they went off in the snow. Their guide said, "Oh, these are Yetis, Yeti footprints." They took photos. They didn't actually see the Yetis, but they went back to London, and these photos were quite famous. Later, they made this abominable snowman movie. This was a Hammer film, the abominable snowman. In this film, too, the Yetis are almost kind of mystical, yogi kind of guys with more of a higher consciousness. That's how this film ends. In Nepal and in this Ivan T. Sanderson, he wrote a famous book, Abominable Snowman. And one of the things here, in Nepal and in Bhutan, Sikkim, they think that to see a Yeti is a very bad thing. It's terrible, terrible luck. They don't want to ever see a Yeti. And they think if they do actually see a Yeti, it means they're going to die. They don't even like to talk about Yetis. They feel that it's almost like just a forbidden subject, because bad things will happen to you if you talk about Yetis. So the idea, too, that Yetis are coming from a secret valley in a Shangri-La, there are stories like that. Tibetan lamas have often said that, yeah, we know that Yetis, live in this valley, but we leave them alone. The idea that, yeah, you would be attacked by Yetis. One of the most famous stories, and I have this in my book, was near Mount Everest. These are Yeti hands that are in the Tangboche Monastery. The pictures you're going to see now are all around Mount Everest. And in 1971, this was a very, very famous story in Nepal. And it was near Mount Everest, too. A woman, a Sherpani, she was in a remote, high-altitude yak valley, and she was by herself. She was a teenage girl. She was like 15 or 16. And what apparently happened was this Yeti came into the pasture at broad daylight. He was starving. He grabbed a yak. They grab them by the horns, and they break their neck. They're so incredibly strong. And once he had killed the yak by breaking its neck, he then bashed its skull in, and he ate the brains of the yak. That's the easy thing to eat. It's nutritious. She was there witnessing all this and went into a shock. And later, when her family found her, she was totally incoherent, and somehow she got this story out, but she became like a mute and couldn't really, her life was so affected, and she was just so shocked and frightened by this Yeti encounter. And that was a very, very famous story all through Nepal in the early 70s. And I first went to Nepal in 1976 myself. So these hands were kept in a monastery called Pangboche. Here's my good friend, Clifford Mahudi. Hi, Clifford. And so these hands, these Yeti hands, were kept in a monastery called Pangboche Monastery. And you could go there and pay something to the yamas, and they would show them to you. But they're missing now. And sometime in the 90s, somebody literally broke into the monastery, and it's there are no roads around there. I mean, you would have to, it's a 2-week hike to get into this area. And they stole the hands. Here we go. These are some photos, allegedly, of Yetis. This was one that was taken. There's the Yeti over here. These guys. This was a Fox TV show in the 90s on The Unexplained, and it ran a quick segment that these guys claimed that they had a Yeti photo, had taken film of a Yeti. No one's really quite sure whether it's real or not. These are some Yeti photos. But you can see a Yeti skull on the way to Kumjung. And in fact, we're talking about Edmund Hillary, one of the first guys to climb Mount Everest. He actually created this skull. It's in a place called Kumjung. Here's the monastery right here. You go in there, this is above Namche Bazaar. Here's the Yeti skull. They keep it in a case. This is still here. You can go and see it. And we're up here in the... so that's the Yeti skull. You can see it. In Bhutan, they have a lot of stories of Yetis, which they call the Migoi. Bhutan has issued all kinds of stamps about Yetis. To them, it's a very real thing. the Yeti mystery. A famous mountain climber, Reinhold Meisner, who's an Austrian, and he's quite famous for, he climbed Mount Everest by himself without oxygen. I mean, he's Joe Climber. He wrote a book about Yetis. This is Bhutan. This area here is a national park of Bhutan, and it's a Yeti area where they get Yeti fur and stuff and hair that they've analyzed. Reinhold Meisner, in his book, he claimed that Yetis are just the Himalayan bear, and that's his explanation. And he had an encounter once, someplace in Nepal or something, where he met a Himalayan bear, and it was walking on two legs. And bears will do that. They'll stand up, and they can walk for short distances with their front arms up, and they walk forward. And of course, they would be very tall. So his explanation is that, yeah, the Yetis are just people mistaking bears, really. And that's kind of an explanation for Bigfoot and stuff too. In Bhutan, they have many, many legends. And yeah, in my mind, Yetis are what they say. They are these giant ape men. They're half human, or they're half missing link. Yetis, and like Bigfoot, they're afraid of fire. They whistle. They make whistling noises and other kind of weird noises, but they cannot speak like humans can. This was interesting too. This was actually like a trance music CD from some guy in England, and so the Yeti is this mystical, yogic, animal, and you hear this about Bigfoot too, that Bigfoots can teleport, that they just appear and reappear. There are stories of Bigfoot coming out of a flying saucer, even. That's a famous story. So you have that. So you've got different things. You've got the grunting, the dangerous animal, half man, who's going to rip you up. They're terribly strong. And let me tell you, and there may be people here who've actually had an encounter with a Bigfoot. I don't know. I have not actually, I have to admit, with Yeti or Sasquatch, not a direct encounter. But when you do, it is so frightening. You are afraid. A friend of mine, here's the Yeti scalp again, with the hand that's also there. That's different than the other hands that are now missing. More of the Yetis. Okay, we'll get into Bigfoot now. So you've got, a friend of mine, this is a guy just in Illinois, and he knew I had written this book. This was some years ago, and I was at our local just little restaurant pub, and he took me aside actually, and he said, "David, I want to tell you that I saw Bigfoot once." And I said, "Really, what happened?" He was a hunter, and he had been out at a hunting blind near the Kankakee River. This is the Kankakee River State Park, although he must have been just outside the park. And he had a rifle on him, he said, and that was there, armed, and it was late afternoon. He said, "I looked across this field, and there was Bigfoot, was just standing there looking at me." And he said, "I was never so afraid in my life." He said, I was shitting my pants. And he was armed, too. I mean, he could have taken a shot at Bigfoot, and he didn't. I mean, he was just like, all I wanted to do was get out of there. This is a photo that I recently come across. It's in our magazine, the last issue of our magazine, which is up there. It seems to be from the 1920s, a hunter with a Bigfoot. I had not seen this photo myself until just last year when I was in Texas at a conference, and this guy had this photo, and I bought it from him actually. And yeah, it's an interesting photo. It looks pretty real. It could be a fake, I don't know. But this is an interesting photo, and it would be from the 1920s. This photo is even more interesting. This is real. And this is probably the oldest known Bigfoot photo. This is taken up in BC, and it was taken about 1911. Here's a close-up of it. It's of a dead Bigfoot that had been shot, supposedly, up in Canada. On the back of the photo that was sent, okay, 1894. Okay, and we'll see where this thing. What he says in this little note, and this is all in the book, my book on Yetis and Sasquatch and hairy giants. What he says is, it's this place here called Lillooet, BC, And Lillooet, BC is really part of the Hudson Bay Company. And what he's saying on this little note on the back of the picture, here's the Hudson Bay Company, what they called Rupert's Land. At one point, the Hudson Bay Company owned all of this land in Canada. And this was before Canada was really Canada. And so they even owned land way out here in Western Canada, in BC. So in Lillooet is a place where there's a big salmon spawning fall. And there's certain times of year, there's just hundreds of big salmon there in Lillooet. And what the guy says in his note is that at the Hudson Bay Company, that they had shot and killed this Bigfoot in 1894 and kept it a secret. And the guy says in there that there were 5 photos that he knew that they kept in this office of the Hudson Bay Company in Lillooet, this photo, and he said there were 5 different photos. And then he stole one of the photos, then wrote that note on the back, and he sent it to these researchers. So this is a fairly new photo too. This seems to be totally real. This is another very old picture of Bigfoot. This one is maybe from the 1940s. I got this guy from a guy in Denver who was a collector of all kinds of oddball photo memorabilia, and he sent this to me. It's some guy who was friendly with Bigfoot, and it's not a very clear photo, but yeah, some people said this was the oldest photo of Bigfoot. In the late 60s, there was what they called the Minnesota Iceman, and Ivan T. Sanderson got involved in this. It was put on display. It was, and here's a photo of it. He was in ice, and it was a Bigfoot that went on display and to certain kind of remoter country fairs in Iowa and Minnesota and Wisconsin, North Dakota, South Dakota, that thing. And people they'd go into the carnival, you'd pay $1 or whatever, and you'd get to go in and see the Iceman, frozen in ice. This is what he looked like in the ice. One of the things about him, he had been apparently shot right through one of his eyes. And that's what killed him. So some sharpshooter just had killed him and shot him, and had shot him right in the eye. What happened to this? It disappeared. What went on with this? Around 1971 or so, the FBI got involved because it had been shot. And this is when the concept of you can't go out shooting Bigfoot because you're a murderer and we'll arrest you. And that's what they started to look into with this was, well, who had shot and killed this Iceman, this Bigfoot? Well, it suddenly disappeared after that. It vanished, like so many of these things. It utterly disappeared. And it was apparently owned by some guy in California. It's a very hazy kind of a thing. I was told also that with the Patterson film, that maybe one of the Bigfoot had been shot there, and that the one that walks away in the film is a female Bigfoot, but that the male had been shot and killed. Lauren Coleman believed, this is all in my book, that this may have come from Vietnam. And there are the forests and stuff of Vietnam. There are also reports of Yeti Bigfoot things, and that the story there, the idea was that during the Vietnam War in the late 60s, some army guy or Green Beret or something had shot and killed this Bigfoot in Vietnam, shot it through the eye, and then it was brought back to America, and it was somehow private property of this guy, and then it was put on display briefly as the Minnesota Iceman. So anyway, we don't know what happened to it, where it is. Ivan T. Sanderson looked at it very closely. He thought it was real. This is another oddball photo of supposedly of a Yeti. This comes from France. This thing was put on display like the Minnesota Iceman briefly in France, in these kind of California things, and it was on display, and then it vanished too. It was supposedly from somewhere in Mongolia or southern Russia that this thing had come from, and we don't know where it is either. There's just some photos. Here it is again. Almost looks like a Wookiee there. So anyway, lots of strange stories about, you know, the missing link and Bigfoot and whatnot. This was this Polish Yeti in 2009. There's a mountain range in Poland that's also very remote. It's on the border of Poland and Czech. It has the highest mountains, and these people were camping, and they took these photos of what they said was this hairy Yeti guy in the distance running around very, very high up in these mountains. So even Europe, in a sense, you know, has got some of these Yetis. Here's the Iceman again, what he kind of looked like under the ice. This, you know, my 8 hours of hell with Bigfoot. This was a story, and this photo, this is a real photo taken by a trail cam in very northern Idaho. And it's kind of a famous photo. Again, people don't know whether it was the story does not have to go with that thing. Whoops. This story is not with that photo. Bigfoot, he doesn't like bikers much. So here we go. Bigfoot in sort of popular thing. Here's Edmund Hillary. What he did in an early one of these Wild Kingdom shows is Edmund Hillary going over the Rowalling Pass looking for Yeti. This is a guy named Tom Slick. He was a Texas oilman in the 50s who went with Jimmy Stewart, who was a friend of his, the actor. They went to Nepal. He got that Yeti hand. Jimmy Stewart actually smuggled it back to the United States in his luggage. He was friends with Tom Slick. Tom Slick was very, very famous cryptozoologist at the time. He died in a mysterious private plane crash in like 1959 in Montana, where his plane just sort of blew up in the sky, and that was it for him. Texas oil man, yeah. So here he is up in Kathmandu. Peter Byrne was with him in '59. He's a British guy too, a Yeti hunter who's kind of well known. This was the Pangboche hand, which Jimmy Stewart, the actor, then smuggled out of Nepal and India. This guy, Takahashi, he's this Japanese Yeti hunter. He claims Japanese love Yetis too. There's certain countries where Bigfoot and Yeti are very popular. Nepal and Bhutan are that, United States and Canada. And the Japanese are really into Yetis too. So the Japanese tend to like mysterious things. These are Yeti footprints that he says he took near Annapurna, which is in central Nepal. Annapurna's the third highest mountain in the world. These are some Yeti footprints around near Everest and Amadablam. I was in this area. This Sherpa, who was a well-known Mount Everest climber, he had run across a number of Yeti footprints, he says. Some people think that Yetis and Bigfoot are some kind of Gigantopithecus, this huge super ape that is supposedly extinct. This is perhaps what it would look like. These things are giants too. Yetis can be 9, 10 feet tall, even bigger. Different goofy stories. When you go to these climbing places in Kathmandu where all the hotball climbers hang out, they have all these posters on the walls of all the Yeti and Bigfoot stories that they like. You know, Bigfoot versus the alien, that's one we got to see. The Bigfoot diet, of course, got to get on that one. Bigfoot escapes, kills 2. Yeah, Bigfoot is dangerous. And Bigfoot killing people. This is probably why Hillary lost the election, really. She named Bigfoot as her running mate. That was big mistake, big mistake. So, yeah, these are from when she was running against Barack Obama. That's when she had the Yeti running mate. So here we go. Here's the famous stories of. This is the Roger Patterson film of the Bigfoot. It's a female, actually. Here's Roger Patterson with Bigfoot cats. He died in the 70s. But he was a famous Northern California Bigfoot hunter. This is a frame from his still, the movie footage he took. This is a really important one because this was a female Bigfoot. Is that her foot is coming up, and we can really see the bottom of her foot. It's an unusual, very unusual photo. So we can see what size shoe she's going to wear. There we go. There's another earlier frame from it. I mean, and it's of course very, very good photos like this that you have to say, well, this is real. Naturally, skeptics claim this was all faked, and that he went out and bought a gorilla suit, and then got his friends to wear his gorilla suit. I don't think so. I feel it's totally real. Some Bigfoot stuff is totally, here's the foot again. I feel that the footage is genuine. This is another interesting Bigfoot photo. This was taken by a guy in Northern California named Cliff Crook, was his name. And this got out. Interesting photo. He claimed that he was standing and the Bigfoot was down in this kind of swamp. So he's looking down at Bigfoot and he took this photo. This was like early 90s or something. It's probably fake, but it's a pretty good photo. It's hard to say. This is the one we looked at earlier. This was taken by supposedly a trail cam, very, very northern Idaho during the winter. He's looking constipated or something there. Here we go. Bill Ballard, or what's his name? He's this Bigfoot guy. His name's escaping me right now. But yeah, he was promoting this photo of Bigfoot, which his mouth sticking his tongue out. Here we go. Searching for Bigfoot.com, yeah. So this was some kind of alleged photo of a Bigfoot. He's the one, too, who promoted that Bigfoot was in a policeman some years ago. A policeman in Georgia claimed he had shot Bigfoot and they had it in a freezer and they were and it turned out it was a fake. And it was a costume with some pigs' intestines and stuff. All right, this is another trail cam footage. What's kind of going on here now, too, is that people have, their smartphones, but people are going out and buying these trail cam things to get pictures of raccoons in their backyard or something. And so this is a skunk ape one in Florida. So they put these little trail cams out, and they're triggered by motion or something. And then what happens is, instead of getting a picture of a raccoon, they get a picture of a Bigfoot. This is not a trail cam footage, nor this one. These are skunk apes. Supposedly it's a smaller type of critter. The skunk apes, they're more about the size of a person. They're about 5 to 6 feet tall. Well, Bigfoot is more like 8, 9 feet tall. This is, again, also in the Everglades. These are supposedly skunk apes running around. This one is hard to see, but we'll get a close-up. These guys were taking pictures, and apparently here, this kind of smallish ape thing is just crouched there by the trail. There's stories too. They say that coyotes are in every state in America. I mean, they're in Delaware, they're in Rhode Island, they're in New York City. Coyotes are everywhere. And they say that about Bigfoot too. That Bigfoot's literally in every state. He's in Arizona, he's in California, and he's back east too. He's in North Carolina, he's in Maryland. This was in Oregon, where this climber he was looking at this mountain away from him, and he sees this like black furry figure, huge, giant, walk up to the top of this mountain. And he's over there, and it stands there, and then it walked up and it went down. And he's like, yeah, I'm mountain climbing with Sasquatch here. So he took these photos, and these are in my book. I had to pay him. Here's another trail cam pic, supposedly, of a Bigfoot. The Brent's cam pic, as they call it, is Brent's trail cam. Again, a photo, the Yetis trying to hide. I was in Illinois when I investigated an interesting Bigfoot sighting, and yeah, here's one. This one is in Arizona, I believe. This photo. Okay, this one was in County Cubbard, Texas. There's some cafe down there, and this photo's there in the cafe where some guy says, yeah, I took this picture of Bigfoot. So here we go. Here's the Miaka skunk ape. This is one of the few really good photos of a skunk ape. This is Miaka, which is near Sarasota, Florida, the west coast of Florida, which is a big Everglades, swampy area. And the story with this was a woman whose backyard was up against these swamps. She claimed that this skunk ape would come to her backyard, and she lived by herself. And what I found that women, and generally older women who are widows or something, live by themselves and in a remote area, and particularly if you have an orchard. And there was a woman in Illinois and another one in Georgia. Both of them had orchards. Their stories are almost exactly the same. They had orchards in their yard, and they would see Bigfoot, and they lived alone. And they would see Bigfoot in their very back of their yard, and Bigfoot is not so much afraid of women. And in both cases, they said, yeah, we kind of got, sort of a friendship of sorts. And the Bigfoot would come and steal apples or peaches from the orchard. And what he would do sometimes was leave her a dead rabbit as a present. And she'd go back to her orchard, the apple trees, and there'd be this dead rabbit with its neck wrung. And she knew, and then she would say, yeah, that's Bigfoot leaving me this rabbit in exchange for my apples or my peaches in Georgia. So that was the story. With the case of the Miaka skunk ape, the woman, it's a really interesting story. This skunk ape kept coming up to her backyard, and she finally took 2 very good photos of it, and then she sent it to the police department with a little note, but she didn't identify herself. And a little note to the police saying, hi, I live in Miaka, and I got this ape coming to my backyard all the time. Here's a picture of it. And so it got out. So that's the Miaka skunk ape pictures. There are 2 of them. Here's another Florida skunk ape, these things. More skunk ape stuff. Legend of Boggy Creek. This is also, if you've ever seen the movie, this is in Arkansas. Again, it's a swamp area where where Bigfoot lives. The story of Boggy Creek, which is also called the Folk River Monster, because it's this folk swamps, was a family in the 60s. And it's a true story. And they had several daughters. And they had a cabin that was very remote, very at the end of this road. But they didn't always stay there, but the girls stayed there. And this was still in the 60s, and they didn't have a phone in their house, in a sense. And I mean, they maybe barely had electricity. And these teenage girls would stay there, but sometimes the parents weren't there because they had some other house that was more in town. And as the story goes, and the movie, what starts happening is when the girls themselves are alone in this remote cabin, Bigfoot starts hanging around there. And he's interested in the women. And in the movie, it becomes very scared, and the Bigfoot's even trying to get inside of the cabin. An interesting story like that was told to me actually by Giorgio. Giorgio was sent up to Washington State to interview for a segment of his show, which they did an episode on Bigfoot, and it was a policeman. And his story was really interesting. He was a police officer near Olympia, Washington, lived in a remote wooded area. And in like 1990 or something, he had seen Bigfoot once just on the road driving. And he had seen it by the side of the road. So he had already sort of witnessed Bigfoot himself and believed in it. Then what he started doing was kind of interesting. He knew Bigfoot was around there. So he would take a jar of peanut butter that was open, and he would do this with a Snickers bar too. Unwrap a Snickers bar. He would tie string around like the open jar of peanut butter or the Snickers bar. He went out to this glade that was away from his house, but where he thought Bigfoot went, and he hung them from a branch, but so that it was quite high up. So you would have to be some 6 or 7 foot tall animal that could reach up and take the Snickers bar or the peanut butter. And he kept going back there all the time, and yeah, the peanut butter was gone, the Snickers bar was gone, and he would see footprints. He knew Bigfoot was coming. And then one day, he was there, he says, and he was, reloading the Snickers bar on the branch or whatever, and he heard footsteps coming, and he knew it was Bigfoot. And he told Giorgio, he says, he was wearing a brimmed baseball cap. He said, I was so afraid. He said, I knew Bigfoot was walking up to me. And he said, I couldn't look at it. I just kept my head down. And he heard Bigfoot walking up to him. And again, you are so afraid. And then it was quiet, and he looked up, and Bigfoot was gone and not there. But it's not the end of the story. He got so afraid after that he wasn't going to put the peanut butter or the Snickers bar out anymore, because he didn't ever want to encounter Bigfoot again, ever. I mean, you're shitting your pants. But Bigfoot, his Bigfoot friend, really liked that peanut butter and the Snickers bars. So at night, Bigfoot started coming to his house and throwing rocks at his windows and his door. And kind of going, hey dude, where's my peanut butter? I like those Snickers bars. And, again, he was afraid. I mean, he was so afraid. And here was the thing, that Bigfoot, and I've been told this in Illinois, you'll sit, and I've heard this also here in Arizona, up in the Mogollon Rim and stuff. You're sitting in a campfire and it's night, and if Bigfoot's in, he sits behind a bush. I mean, they're just so stealthy and good at concealing themselves and stuff. They'll sit there, this is what I've been told, and they flick pine cones or small pebbles at you. And they're super accurate. And so you're sitting there at a campfire, and this one guy in Illinois told me this with his brother, and his brother didn't believe in Bigfoot, but this other guy, he was like, yeah, man, Bigfoot's here, I'm telling you. And so Bigfoot was flicking these stones at him, and his brother was like, hey, stop that. I know you're doing this. He's like, I'm not throwing this stuff at you, bro. This is Bigfoot. This is Bigfoot doing it, And so, yeah, you have these stories of Bigfoot is going to throw stones. But like with the policeman, Bigfoot was just throwing pine cones and little small pebbles at his windows just to get his attention. But Bigfoot could have torn that whole house down. I mean, he could rip the door off the hinges. I mean, Bigfoot is so incredibly strong. I mean, it's something. Another interesting story about Bigfoot. Here's an Arizona photo, supposedly, that somebody took on the Mogollon Rim. Very fuzzy, but it's supposedly Bigfoot carrying a baby over here, as they're saying. Yeah, it's not a very good photo. But yeah, the story of Bigfoot, that he can just tear you apart and kill you. And there have been people, definitely, who've been killed by Bigfoot, people who are missing, and hunters. There's a policeman out of California now that some of you might be familiar with, or perhaps heard on Coast to Coast or something. His name is David Paulides. And he's written a whole series of books called Missing 411. That is the phone number for a missing person, 411. What his books are all about is hunters and berry pickers and other people who go into national parks and remote areas and never come back. And sometimes they're just completely missing. Other times they find their bodies, or they find their weapons and things like that. But his books are very interesting studies. These are some more Bigfoot type photos. But what's really clear when you read his books is that Bigfoot is really dangerous. And if you're a hunter, hunting by yourself, going into certain places, you may never. Okay, here's another Bigfoot picture over here. Here he is crossing here. I think this is Bigfoot there. There he is. Skunk Ape Festival. So with the David Paulides books, yeah, they're pretty scary. And one of the things that comes out of his books is that a lot of times little children are missing. And sometimes they're autistic children, and it's quite frightening. They're out picking berries, they stray a little bit, and suddenly they're gone, and they completely vanish. And then there's a huge, and this has been going on for 100 years. He has stories going back to the late 1800s and stuff. And suddenly, all the police, hound dogs are brought in and all that, and they'll search a whole area for this missing, 3-year-old, 4-year-old. And days go by, and and they're baffled why they can't find this kid. The bloodhounds won't track them and stuff. And then they'll actually find the child alive in places they had already searched. Or they'll find him on top of a mountain nearby, miles away, where farther than any little kid could have possibly walked. And Paulides, he basically thinks, and I think he's right, that what happens, Bigfoot is attracted to these little kids. They're not afraid of Bigfoot because they're just these little kids, and in some cases they are autistic. And so Bigfoot grabs them and he takes them off. And sometimes these kids are not ever recovered. Sometimes they are found dead, but a lot of times they're found alive. And it's a weird thing. In fact, it was in the news this morning of some little girl in North Carolina that was kidnapped for 18 years. They just found her, and she was raised by some other mother. It's almost like that Bigfoot wants to bring these little kids back to its den or something like that. Here's the other Miaka skunk ape photo. So, in my mind, it's really the Bigfoot and Yetis and skunk apes. Here's the Miaka State Forest, this area. Here's the area, this around Tampa and St. Petersburg. Miaka's right in here. So this area is really skunk ape central in Florida. But skunk apes are in all these different things. So here we go. Those are the 2 different photos. These are very, very good photos and not faked. Something's going on. In my mind, as a cryptozoologist, this is one of the latest photos. Looks kind of fake, but who knows? This is a Bigfoot standing in water in the Everglades that came out. But to me, they're real. They're animals. They eat. They leave footprints. They shit. They're interested in people. They're in sex. They have incredibly good sense of smell. They're good swimmers. They live in swamps. They're huge. Their feet are twice as big as our feet. They easily stand 8 to 9 feet tall, I would say. They have conical heads. One of the really oddball stories, this is sort of what skunk apes are thought to look like. This was, I thought, a very interesting story. When Mount St. Helens, how are we doing here? We'll quit here in a second. When Mount St. Helens blew up in 1981, was it? And what happened then was a pyroclastic flow of hot gases poured down the mountain. And it incinerated animals, and trees, instantly were incinerated on fire, and bears and deers and people were instantly killed by this wave of hot gases that came from the volcano. Then a guy reported that he was in that area immediately afterward, and the army was there with a helicopter, and they were picking up, what he claimed, they were picking up carcasses of dead animals on Mount St. Helens, and he claimed some of these dead animals were Bigfoot. And that the army was now taking this is what he claimed, the army was now taking these dead Bigfoot that had been burned alive by Mount St. Helens, like other animals, loading them into helicopters and taking them away to an army base, probably. So that's interesting. And what would the army be doing now with a dead Bigfoot? Well, they could clone a Bigfoot. They could do genetic experiments, create their Bigfoot army, to take over America for the New World Order. I'm just joking. I don't know. But it's interesting, the idea that the army has got Bigfoot. You do have the oddball story of flying saucers, UFOs, and Bigfoot stories, and Bigfoot getting out of a flying saucer. I mean, the idea that, you know, we all love the Star Wars movies, and George Lucas is a genius. But whether, you know, Bigfoot can fly spaceships and run around with a ray gun in his hand, you know, I'm not so sure. I mean, what little we really know of Bigfoot, he's a kind of a subhuman. He's a half human. But there's something there. His DNA and our DNA are similar. And that's the same thing with chimpanzees and with orangutans. Human DNA and chimpanzee DNA and orangutan DNA is very, very close. And in fact, it's theoretically possible that a human and orangutan can have a child, or a human and maybe even a chimp. And there are stories of people who've had babies or Bigfoot, half human, half Bigfoot children. This was an interesting story too. This was like 2003. It was on Fox News and local news. This is in South Carolina. This guy, North Carolina, I mean, Tim Peeler. He was in the news for a couple of days. He lives on top of this mountain in North Carolina, a remote kind of hillbilly guy without a phone and stuff. And he claimed on the news that this 12-foot tall, 6-fingered, white Bigfoot was coming up to his farm and was trying to eat his dogs, was trying to get his dogs. And that he was personally chasing this Bigfoot away. And in this photo, that's what he's doing. He's demonstrating for the news guys how he's telling Bigfoot, you know, get out of here, you know, you get going, you know, you. And you'd think he would be armed or something, but he wasn't shooting the Bigfoot. That's kind of a mistake. And that is part of the problem too. So this was a really interesting story. It was national news, and it wasn't just a normal Bigfoot. It was a white Bigfoot, a very tall Bigfoot, and a 6-fingered one. Here he is, drawing pictures of it for the news and stuff. What seems to happen with these white Bigfoot and stuff is that for anything, for Bigfoot or whatever you got, you have to have a breeding population, and there is a breeding population of skunk apes and Bigfoot and whatnot. But then, so what will happen is, and this happens to sort of bears and lions would be another example, as an adult male gets older and he's become really an old man, he gets forced out of the clan. And the younger males force the old male out. And lions do that, other animals do that are, you know, that are kind of a pride or a clan. And the old man Bigfoot is forced out, and he becomes a dumpster diver. And he strays close to the city. You know, the other younger Bigfoot know not to go into town and go dumpster diving, stay away from the highways. But these old Bigfoot, and they're on their last legs. They're dying. They've got white hair. They're suddenly seen. So they suddenly go to some guy's farm. I was told also, this was in Illinois at one I investigated. He was a Vietnam vet who lived near to Seneca, Illinois, where it was a lot of Bigfoot stuff was happening there. And I talked to him, and he took me out, and armed, he immediately grabbed his pistol. But he told me that, yeah, Bigfoot was eating his cats. And he lived alone. He had a farm, a corn soybean farm, right on the edge of this bush and forest. And he had a bunch of cats. I mean, the guy was a cat guy. He must have had 7 or 8 cats. And he told me, he said, every winter I lose a couple of cats. And according to him, it's Bigfoot's eating my cats. And for this guy, it was Bigfoot was trying to eat his dog. So the bloody rage of Bigfoot. So Bigfoot is dangerous. And he's curious too. He's like, hey, what are you doing here? Here we go. Some people say they have good, there are stories of, again, it's usually women, but sometimes it's men. And they say, yeah, I've got a Bigfoot friend. I'm in psychic contact with him. You know, we meet in the backyard now and then, and he psychically tells me, you know, this and that or whatever. You don't want to mess with Sasquatch either. See, now look at him. He's a conehead. That is so you've got this pointed skull and the skulls and whatnot. So Yetis, Abraham Lincoln and Sasquatch had a lot of arguments and disagreements. And of course, interviewing the skunk ape in the Florida things. And they even have their own money, skunk ape dollars, which you can get. So I like to make, just fun. It's a subject that I think, we can enjoy and laugh at, although for many people, Sasquatch is a very serious subject. And you never know what kind of photos you're going to get. So yeah, the fake photos, they'll find them out there. And this is my last photo. In fact, my friend from Zuni, Clifford Mahudi, is the one who took me here. This is up in a ravine near to Zuni on the Arizona part of the reservation. We think this might be a Bigfoot, and it's kind of hard to tell whether he's got 5 toes or 6 toes. But this might be, and those of you who spent time around Payson and Strawberry and Pine, or even Camp Verde and stuff, Bigfoot is well known in that area of Arizona, and he's called the Mogollon Monster. And that was interesting. In 2005, I also have this in the book, that on the White Mountain Apache Reservation, what happened was there's a lot of stories of Bigfoot as a peeping Tom. And this happened. And so some Apache couple who were living on the reservation, they called the White Mountain Apache police late one night. It was midnight. And they said, "We've got a peeping Tom here, looking in our bedroom window. We think you need to come here." Well, they dispatched a police woman who drove immediately to their cabin. And as she pulled up to the cabin, there was Bigfoot standing there in the headlights at the cabin. He was still there. And yeah, Bigfoot, whoa, cops are here, everybody, and he took off into the woods. And the couple came out, and they were just like, wow, it's Bigfoot. And then the police lady too, it's like, yeah, I saw Bigfoot too. And here's the thing. Because she's an American Indian, she went back to the White Mountain Police headquarters, and she wrote up a report with Bigfoot in it. And, just like it happened. And it's a 2-page report. It's in my book. She, police officer, sworn to duty, saw Bigfoot. And that is the difference. In an Anglo-European police department, that policeman would not have gone back and written that police report. He would have known not to. You don't, and this is the difference. I mean, and I think that's such a good thing about the Apaches and the other Native Americans. I mean, they can just, she's a policewoman. She can just say, and she's Apache. She can just say, "Look, I know what I saw. I saw Bigfoot," and she can tell her supervisors and everybody else, "I saw Bigfoot." But, John Smith from Payson, he can't go out and see Bigfoot and go back and write a report on it. He cannot do it. The police department won't let him do it. I mean, and he knows better than to not do it. He might privately tell people, "Man, I think I saw Bigfoot when I went to that house," but he wouldn't write a report. And that's the big difference. So look, that winds it up for today, and I think we'll have some time for questions. And then, do we have time for questions? What time do we have to be out of here? We've got a few minutes. Does anybody have some questions? Sure. Yes, sir. Ma'am.
Yeah, I'm just going back to the CONEHEADS.
Back to the what?
Back to the CONEHEADS.
CONEHEADS. Okay. Yeah. Right.
Lloyd Pye.
Right, Lloyd Pye, and I have pictures of Lloyd, and I know Lloyd, or he's passed away now.
But supposedly he had DNA running that it was a cross between human and unknown.
Right. Yeah, Lloyd kept saying he was having DNA tests and stuff made, and in my mind, and he thought it was, we're going to have extraterrestrial DNA in it, he thought. As far as I know, nothing really conclusive ever came from that. But it went on for years that he said he was going to have it tested, yeah.
I thought he finally,
Maybe right at the end of, he passed away 3 or 4 years ago, but...
well, he said the guy that was running the DNA tests was some supervisor or somewhere.
Okay,
And,
yeah.
And this guy claimed that he found some.
You would think they would have been published, but Lloyd never really wrote another book. I met Lloyd a number of times, and I held that Star Child skull. It's a similar thing with these skulls in Peru. I mean, they're more impressive than the Star Child skull really was. I mean, those ones. And that Star Child skull was smaller. It wasn't so much a cone head, but it looked weird. It was more like a pumpkin head, and it was missing stuff. And he wanted it, and he owned it. But, you know, they could do much the same with these skulls in Peru. And I keep hearing about people saying, well, we're going to do DNA testing and stuff on these cone heads and stuff. But I've yet to see a really good report on that, honestly. But that is something I think particularly, those things in Paracas and Ica, it's those skulls there that should have some DNA done. Unfortunately, a lot of times when it comes to national museums and state museums and stuff, and I know this for the case of Mexico, they have their own agenda, and if a DNA report, you know, did show it was extraterrestrial or something, they wouldn't release it. And for the same reason that many of these places won't even put these skulls on display. I've seen so much in Mexico and stuff where I've gone to museums. Comacalco is one, which is near Villahermosa, in the Olmec area, and they had a big display of all of these Olmec heads and ceramics and weird faces, and it was the bizarrest display. I show it in my lectures, and you just look at some of the faces. This is a museum display, and you're like, wow, these guys are weird-looking guys. Some of them look like extraterrestrials. Some look like Africans. Some look like Chinese. And some just look weird. And the last time I went to that museum, they had completely removed that display. It's just not there anymore. And the museum is still there with the stuff to see, but not that controversial display of all of these strange faces. Something must have happened. And I honestly believe that, like in the case of Lovelock and stuff like that, the story of the Smithsonian taking all the stuff in the Grand Canyon back to Washington, D.C., that, there are some archaeologists out there, I don't want to name blame somebody like Smithsonian, I just don't know, but they literally go around to museums in foreign countries too and say, take that off display. Don't have this in your museum. It's too controversial. Yes, sir.
Would that have anything to do with, does that have anything to do with why you moved up to Canterbury in the hopes of seeing one yourself?
I do like to go camping on the Mogollon Rim. So we camp up there, and that's a nice area to go camping. I see a chiropractor in Flagstaff, who's actually a pretty good friend of mine, and my Zuni friend Clifford knows him too. His name is he's a chiropractor. And he lives actually outside of Flagstaff in the woods. And it's kind of a remote house. He's got neighbors. But he likes to go hiking a lot. And he's had a lot of Bigfoot experiences. And where he's gone, he likes to hike and go up kind of remote canyons and look in caves. And he's claimed that he's come more or less face to face with a Bigfoot, like in a cave, and he gets afraid and he leaves. But he's a doctor. And in fact, he one time told me, he said, because I wanted to put some of his stories in a book, and he said, well, I'm a doctor and I have a practice, and I don't want to ruin my reputation by being a Bigfoot nut. And that is a problem, I think, where people have unusual experiences, and a Bigfoot one would be some that people would have. And you just don't know what to say, whether you go and tell all your friends that you've just seen Bigfoot, or maybe not. Maybe you want to keep it to yourself. So, I don't know. Any more questions? Oh,
Do
yeah.
you have any photographs of their habitats or cabins or where they're living? I see a lot of pictures of them, but do you know where they have?
Right, where does Bigfoot live? Yeah. There are photos, and I've seen some up by the Mogollon Rim, where they make little kind of small huts, kind of round huts of branches. And I saw this on the internet recently. I didn't show any of the photos. I could have snagged them, but yeah, he was up there on the Mogollon Rim and found these kind of stacks of branches, and they're sort of a domed little hut, but very primitive. And they thought this is what Bigfoot was making them. What I was told in Illinois at Seneca when I investigated this thing is that, and I asked this guy, and he was the one who was telling me how they throw pine cones at you and little rocks. And one of the incident that had happened there that was famous, and it got into the Chicago papers, and this is also like 2005. That area is, the monster there is called the DuPont monster because there's a dynamite factory there. And that dynamite has to be stored in bunkers underground and away from areas. So it's a private forest, and hunters aren't to go into it. And it's along the Illinois River, so it's very forested. There's a park there, but then there's this private forest. And there's a Lover's Lane area there, a little hollow in a bend. And it's famous for Bigfoot sightings, and it's also famous as this Lover's Lane. And what happened in 2005, and police were involved in this too, was this young couple was in the back seat doing it at midnight. And the woman looks up, and there's Bigfoot looking in the window. And she freaks out, and they both freak out, and it's just, I mean, they, their romantic feelings were totally gone. And they literally roared off to the police station and told the police they had just had a encounter with Bigfoot. And it became a very famous local story, and it got into the Chicago papers. And I went to investigate it. And I went with my wife, Jennifer, and we went to that town. I felt like we were Skolder and Mully in the X-Files kind of thing. And we went to this local bar. It was in the middle of the afternoon, sat there, had a beer. I asked the bartender, this woman, I said, yeah, I'm here to investigate some Bigfoot stories. I didn't know who to talk to. I just started talking to her. She immediately was very friendly. She pointed to the two guys sitting next to us, saying, oh yeah, they know all about the DuPont monster and Bigfoot around here. So immediately, these guys started telling us that town, everyone in that town knew Bigfoot was around. And he hung out in this DuPont forest area. And that's when I also met this other guy. And he told me a part of the story that was not in the newspapers, and that was this. That the couple who were having sex in the back of this car in Lover's Lane, that the woman had been having her period, and they had thrown a tampon out of the car. And that's what brought Bigfoot. He smelled the tampon, and he was there. Hey, what's going on? And so that was the big story of that and Bigfoot. So, but anyway, here's what this guy told me to finally answer your question. So I asked him, I said, where? Because winters are pretty tough there too. And I said, where's Bigfoot living around here? And what he told me, he said, well, what I can figure out is that Bigfoot lives in burrows along the banks of the river, kind of like alligators or bears. Okay, so you have a steep embankment coming to a river, and you dig just a little burrow into the back, your own little mini cave. Alligators, crocodiles, they also do this. And they create their own little caves off by the side of the river. With alligators and stuff, they're often, the entrance actually can be underwater to go up into it. And that's why they think the skunk apes do the same thing, they think, in the Florida Everglades and these swamps, that they're living in little burrows along the banks somehow, in their own little underground thing. But yeah, and up around Flagstaff, what my friend told me, he believes there's a lot of caves up there. And along the Mogollon Rim, there's many, many little caves. And that he thinks, yeah, Bigfoot lives in these caves. So that's the story. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just wondering, who actually owns the skulls like in Peru? Is it the Peruvian government or the private citizen?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are some private museums, more state governments. Like there's 2 towns there. One's called Ica, and one's called Paracas. And skulls are found there, and both of those towns have their own museums. And so it's not the Peruvian government itself, but it's the local government, you know. So they are government owned and stuff. The thing is in Peru and Bolivia is more or less the same. They're pretty open-minded about this. And so in Peru, particularly, those skulls are so common that there's no reason why they shouldn't put them in the museums. There's just so many of them. And they realize that they're popular. And so you go to those museums, you see them. But it's in museums where they're not so common and they were rare, that's where they put them out and people are like, whoa, what's that? You know, and they're kind of freaking out. When you see those skulls, you know, I mean, they're weird. I mean, you're thinking this got to be an extraterrestrial or something. I mean, and to actually meet somebody who looked like that, yeah, I mean, that would be scary right there, I think. Yes, sir.
Can you speak to the 2 rows of teeth and 6 fingers?
Okay, the 2 rows, right, and 2 rows of teeth and 6 fingers. With some of these skeletons, and some of them, we just have stories. There's one story out of the late 1800s was in San Luis Obispo in Central California, and they were digging a basement or something, and they came across, they said, like a sarcophagus, and they opened it, and what was inside it was like a 9-foot tall person with double rows of teeth, 6 fingers on each hand. A similar thing like that happened here in Arizona, down near Tombstone and Nogales in Crittenden, Arizona. And that was a fort. And that's a story too, that when they were digging what they called a powder magazine at that fort, they were digging a pit. And that area is an ancient city too. That's the Cibola area and there are some ancient ruins there. So there they also claim they found dug up this skeleton, and it had double rows of teeth and 6 fingers and stuff. So you have that polydactylism with people, and that is that's something that people just have, and some people are still born with 6 fingers or 6 hands. Double rows of teeth are more unusual, but there are people who are born with that. So in a sense, that is a part of this gigantism thing that, yeah, the 6 fingers, double rows of teeth, and then, being 9 feet tall. Yeah, I mean, that's part of the story. So maybe that's just whether there was a whole race of people who were like that. I mean, it's a strange thing. I can't really explain it. Yes?
Just curious, what the mystery of Bigfoot is that they can't find any, bones or anything from that. How does that compare? I don't know much about hunting and stuff, but do they find bones?
That's a really good question and an important one, and it's one I'm asked a lot, and it's something that people should ask. Yeah, I mean, and that's well, why aren't you just walking down the trail or going hiking and you see a dead Bigfoot, or you're a hunter even, dead Bigfoot? Well, that's not really going to happen, and here's why. I've done a lot of hiking, and I'm not a hunter actually, but I've hiked a lot in remote areas in the U.S. and stuff. And look, there's mountain lions out there, and there's bears and stuff. How many people do you know who've ever walked down a trail and seen a dead mountain lion? You're not ever going to see one, okay? And you won't see a dead bear either. You're just not walking down a trail, or even walking off, you're just not going to see a dead bear or a dead mountain lion. You simply won't. But they're got to be out there. I mean, mountain lions have to die, and so do bears, and Bigfoot as well. What kind of tends to happen is, unless they're hit by a car or a truck, yeah, when they're dying, they go to a remote place and die, not on the trail, but in a remote cave or something like that. But yeah, I mean, it seems natural that, yeah, we would somehow just see the old dead Bigfoot who died of old age. But yeah, it's just not how it really works. The other thing like that too, and that just goes with fossils, when something dies out in the woods, it doesn't become fossil, and within a very short time, scavengers and insect stuff, it's gone pretty quick, really. But that's it. Yes, ma'am.
Have there been any droppings from Bigfoot that might have been analyzed?
Yes. Well, and they do. And Bigfoot hair, and that's the main thing. Here's a Bigfoot trap, and this is what they do in Bhutan. This is what sort of the policeman was doing in Washington. What you do is you have to have some nails or something, but you have something that the Bigfoot or the animal wants, a Snickers bar, and then you make it so he has to, it's hard for him to get it, and as he gets it, he will be scratched by a nail or whatever, okay? And then when you go back later, and this has absolutely happened, okay? And in Bhutan, this is what British researchers were doing to get Yeti DNA and stuff. So then what they've got is literally blood and some hair from the Yeti, okay? And that's what they're trying to do, is get that. And you would think there would be Bigfoot, dung out there too that the people have scooped up, and that would have DNA and stuff too. But in Bhutan, that's what they did. And these British scientists, they made this kind of trap, and then they took the hair and they took it back to Britain to analyze it, and they couldn't come up with it of any known animal. And they later declared that, I guess this is a Yeti, because it's not a bear. It's not this, it's not that. So, okay, I know that. I think our time's up, huh? One last question, sure.
Yes, I wonder, have you heard of the incident in Afghanistan where the squad of military came across a 12-foot red-headed giant and killed it?
Wow. When was that? I might have vaguely heard about that. Was that on that site Before It's News? Do you know that one? No. Oh, okay. I might have heard of that. Was there photos? Did they? What happened then?
Supposedly, the U.S. military is a squad of Army individuals doing a cave search and ran across it, killed it, and led it back out. And then the story went dark, and I was curious if there's any validity to it.
Yeah, right. I may have heard something like that. You don't know. I mean, some of those stories could be true. They can also be false. Unfortunately, there's a lot of fake news out there. There was a story also that a Vimana was discovered by the military in Afghanistan, and that they went into a cave somewhere in northern Afghanistan, and there was literally a spaceship in it. And they said it was Zoroaster's, the story, from Zoroastrianism and stuff. Yeah. And so that was another story that came out. I mean, so I don't know if those stories are true. When the military's involved, I would think that, the photos aren't going to be released. They would keep it a secret, and they have good reason to, I think. I try and take all this, with an open mind, like you. And what I think, look, not everything that's weird and strange is actually true. But some things that are weird and strange are true. And trying to figure it all out. I'm constantly, because I'm on the TV show and we have websites and the magazine and stuff, I'm constantly getting people sending me emails of things, and it's just like they've got something amazing, this and that. And my response is always, okay, well, send me the photo, send me the evidence. And 9 times out of 10, when they send me the photo, I'm terribly disappointed. And I'm just like, oh boy, it's a face on a mountain that's a simulacra or something. I mean, I need real evidence for things, not, And a lot of the photos I show were fuzzy photos, who knows what they are. But I'll tell you one thing. Because of smartphones, because people are now walking around with movie cameras in their pocket, good high-definition movie cameras and and that's a new thing. It wasn't, 9 out of 10 people weren't walking around with a, instant filming camera in their pocket all the time. But now we have that. And so when people see something unusual or Bigfoot or a UFO that's happening and fleeting of the moment, and a lot of times you don't have a lot of time to take pictures of this stuff, but people are getting photos. And so there's absolutely more and more photos of Bigfoot and skunk apes than ever before, that's for sure. I mean, they're coming out all the time, and some of them probably fake too. And the same thing with UFOs. I mean, there's more good photos of UFOs coming out than ever. And in my mind, they're probably all, pretty authentic too. Good. All right, well, thanks everyone.